Gambia House. I'm glad to see all of you here. Just in the few minutes that I have to say these few words, I know this is all quite boring stuff. You know, who gets elected and making sure we're all registered and so on and so forth. But it's just my feeling that if the country sees that we have a properly organized structure, that does a lot of things. One is it affects the level of fundraising, for example, because people will give money to an organization that appears to have a structure and that is properly organized. So that's why we're trying to spend so much time on this issue. And I want to thank the Deputy Chair for spearheading this organization. The second thing is, notwithstanding the structure, we should always remember that this is a volunteer organization. Progressive Liberal Party is an organization of people who voluntarily come together to contribute toward creating a better country by producing candidates of quality who will then become members of parliament and senators and then serve in the cabinet. And then, of course, fill all of the other board positions which are available once you get state power. So as a volunteer organization, our Constitution says something like this, that when you interpret the Constitution, you interpret it in a purposive way. In other words, you interpret it in a way which is practical so that it works and you're not putting up artificial barriers to people participating in the party. I think it's near the back, one of the last provisions in the Constitution. So I bear that in mind. So, as I said to a number of people who've spoken to me about this, not to have so much anxiety about rules and all the rest of it. I mean, the rules are there, and we try to follow the rules, but the way you interpret the rules is to make sure that they make sense and practical sense in their application, and that they don't scare people off from participating in the organization. I have a sense after 1 year of the FNM in office that PLPs are finally sort of getting over this election of last year. And from the earliest days, I've been saying that after the 10th of May, there was nothing you could do about the 10th of May. The 10th of May is in the history books, and as you can talk about it till thy kingdom come. You can't change what happened on the 10th of May. What you do have the power to do is to change the future. You can determine what's going to happen in front of you. I mean, to the extent that it's within your power. So the quicker we can get up and start determining, well, what are we going to do next, the better. And it didn't seem to me that there was too much utility, and I mention this again because I saw one of the chat groups again trying to relitigate the 10th of May, what the PLP didn't do and why didn't we do this. And this was a spirited argument over the decision by the government, they say, to provide, they say, affordable homes for uniformed branches of the public service. And so someone wrote me and said, well, I saw the comments about, well, we asked the PLP to do this and they didn't do this. And I think someone adequately answered it in this sense. First of all, you couldn't do everything in the universe in 5 years. That's the first thing. So some things were done. But secondly, I said, the leaders of the party, and this is what you talk about message discipline. When the Affordable Care Act or bill was debated in the House, the leaders of the party took a position with regard to the bill. They supported the bill, but they made some caveats in their support. And two people, as I remember it, spoke. One was Glenys Hanna Martin, the other was Philip Brave Davis. And here are the points they made. First point they made was, fine, you welcome affordable housing, if you want to call it that, or these service lots, for anybody. including the uniformed services. No problem with that. But the question you have to ask yourself is, why customs and not the nurses? Why the police and not the ambulance drivers? So you start getting in who is more important than who, the question of discrimination. So that's the first thing. That's one point they made. And I'm coming to this question. I'm not arguing whether what they said was right or wrong. That's what the party's position was in the House. The second message was, Glenys Hanna Martin in particular, I remember saying, okay, you provide someone with a service lot. Where are they going to find the capital? One, to buy the lot, and two, if they do get the service lot and manage to buy it, how are they going to get the money to build a house? So and we have experience with this because we know that the PLP did a service lot subdivision in Mangrove Key. And even though the lots are now distributed and done and all the rest of it, only 2 houses have been built since that subdivision was put in. So obviously money, access to money is a problem. And then as someone pointed out, George Mackey, who was my predecessor in Foxville, compulsorily acquired something called the Sugarman Estate in Foxville, just between Eastwood and the Foxville Village. And this was an area where people in Foxville traditionally squatted on the land. They claimed it was farming, but people started building houses because the government, when they acquired it in 1990, did nothing, so people just squatted on the land. There were about 20 of the people who did this. Starting with Neville Wisdom as the housing minister, followed by Ken Russell as the housing minister, and finally with Ken Dorset as the housing minister. I negotiated with them to give the people who were in actual occupation of the land conveyances for the land on which they occupied for a nominal price. I don't think any person paid more than $1,000. If they paid $500, it was plenty. But they got the property on which they were living. That's what the PLP did. Some 20 conveyances. I don't know how many of those people voted PLP when the election took place. And I say that because people were arguing that because Minas has given this gift, so to speak, to the uniform branches, that we've lost the uniform branches forever. The issue is this. What I'm saying is you can go chapter and verse through things that the PLP did for voters of this country in the last 5 years, and it did not make one single difference to their voting for us or voting against us. Not a difference. So there's no magic or, so on and so forth. And even when they try and pin it on the last leader of the party and say that that's the reason, if you actually go through and do a rational discourse on the things which they say happened, you would wonder why that did. But what I'm saying again is, that's not my business anymore. The fact is, that's what happened. That's the end of that. The man who's the party leader said, I accept responsibility for it. A line is drawn under it. We are now moving forward. And that's the point I wish to make. And the thing about message discipline I'm saying is this. I think it is a wise thing if you pay attention to what the leaders of the party are saying and advancing in the House, then everybody falls behind that message. But there's still too much arguing and energy over we should have done this, we should have done that, we should have done the next thing. The point is, in the years 2002 to 2007, the PLP created 40,000 jobs. In the years 2007 to 2012 to 2017, we created another 40,000 jobs. But those 40,000 jobs were clearly not enough to convince the electorate that the PLP was good enough. So in starting to think about where we go forward, we're saying, okay, you say our leadership was unacceptable. That's changed. The structure of the party, we're trying to deal with that. Now, what other issues are we talking about? The question is, do we need to create 70,000 jobs? And if it's 70,000 jobs that we have to create over 5 years, how are we going to create those jobs? For example, we know that infrastructure development really drives the economy because it hires people who are construction workers, and construction workers spend money. The airports around the country. We left in place the monies, the plans to redo North Eleuthera, to redo Exuma, to redo Long Island, and to redo Bimini. Hundreds of millions of dollars. The other day you heard them boasting about the money they spent refurbishing or building the dorms at the University of the Bahamas in Grand Bahama. And Peter Turnquest claiming credit for fulfilling one of the F&M's promises. The interesting thing about that is this was all negotiated by Michael Dowell. Monies were supposed to be set aside. The Grand Bahama Port Authority, remember, in exchange for getting the tax concessions which were granted in 1994, were supposed to do certain things in Grand Bahama. They didn't do them. They built some things, the 2 schools, the Grand Bahama Sports Stadium, but one of the things they didn't do was the construction of a high school for East Grand Bahama. So that left $3 million that they should have spent that they did not spend. And what Dr. Dowell negotiated was the $3 million to be used to build those dorms for the University of the Bahamas, which are now completed. But the Minister of Finance gets up and says, this is the fulfillment of our promise. And in our chat groups, we were saying, see what they did, what the PLP didn't do and should have done. There's a lot of stuff going on like that. So the question is, what are we going to do going forward? I've talked about the airports and infrastructural development and so on and so forth, and the job situation. That's what we got to be thinking about now. We're also thinking about something called the basic income. Can we get to a point in this country where everyone in the country, regardless of status, is guaranteed, if you're over 18, guaranteed a basic income? Because what we've seen is the levels of poverty have risen exponentially in the Bahamas over the last decade. And in this last year, we are having specific problems with hunger and housing in an unprecedented sense. The question is, how does a government solve that problem? And several of the governments in Europe have been experimenting with this idea of everybody having a basic income. So you're not talking about social welfare programs, but anyone who has no income gets a basic income from the state, so long as that person has no income. So there are these big ideas. New Providence clearly needs a public transportation system. The people in the Dominican Republic, I think, have spent something like $20 billion putting in a subway system. Our island can probably take what they have in Florida, a people mover, which goes overhead. That's a few $1 billion. It's basically automatic. But if we start planning it, and they keep saying that this country has no money and you can't borrow and so on and so forth. But no development can take place without borrowing, and this country's economy has to expand because the population is growing. And so you have this situation where I said to people, they told us, do not borrow money because we can't afford to pay it back. But we went and borrowed $100 million to buy 5 new planes for Bahamas Air. And there's no charge on the Treasury because the French took a lien on the planes and then said, the price of the ticket, you dedicate some of that money to repay the loan. So no sovereign guarantee was required. But you got 5 brand new planes, the scheduling is much better, smooth rides, good planes, clean, right. And it's for those who use the service. And if we had not done that, remember after the hurricane last year, they were boasting about how they airlifted people from the southern Bahamas to New Providence out of the hurricane? Which planes they used? The same planes they told us not to borrow the money for. So there are lots of things like that. Now, to get people mobilized, so those are the big ideas. To get people mobilized, we need someone in the constituencies to be organized around. We found, for example, that one of the reasons we couldn't get Mount Moriah to meet, or we couldn't get a successful meeting in Mount Moriah, was until we called Arnold Forbes and say, look, can you call your people and see if we can get a meeting together? And we had a huge meeting. And I mention that because a lot of people said, oh, these people who lost in the last election, don't bring them around because nobody wants to see them, and so on and so forth. But a decision to do that then led to, in many cases, no one showing up in the branch meetings, because the way people function is they like to see somebody they know. They gather around that person. Doesn't mean that the person is going to end up being the candidate in the next election, but you've asked them to hold on and keep people together until such time as a decision is made. And a lot of people have agreed to do that. So one of the things Mr. Davis is going to do is he's going to have a meeting of all the former candidates and see where their heads are at going forward, because pretty soon the candidates committee has been constituted. We're waiting for the Constitutional Committee to report to see whether the procedures are going to change. But one procedure we do know is there's going to be an announcement of a module where everybody who wants to be a candidate for the PLP will have to be a part of that module. You know, you're going to have to run through a set of courses on parliamentary procedure and collective responsibility and what it is to be a backbencher and the history of the PLP and the history of the country. And unless you go through that, it's a qualifier. Yeah, you know, as the lawyers say, a sine qua non for running for office in the PLP. And so that's going to happen during the summertime. And there's a whole list of books which people will be asked to, you know, and there are lots of books around about the history of the party. You know, one of the best is Sir Henry Milton Taylor's book, My Political Memoirs. And he was around from 1910. He starts from the 1910 general election and works his way all the way up to the modern times. So it's an excellent book. So that's what we plan to do. And I'm telling you, people are lining up to be candidates to the PLP in the next election. And that's always a sure sign that the population at large detects there's a shift. There's a shift coming. I mean, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. But what we're trying to do is to build the momentum. And one of the things that will happen, of course, is a special convention that we're trying to plan for the 28th of July, which will just be one day to try and deal with the adoption of the changes to the Constitution. And then, of course, the regular convention will take place in October. So we're spending a lot of time on these sort of nitty-gritty, nuts and bolts things that are not very sexy. They are, you know, drudge work. But unless you do it, you can't get the votes in the ballot box when the time takes place. And I said to people that it's very interesting today. How many of you read The Guardian's editorial today? Well, The Guardian's editorial today said that the F&M should expel Frederick McAlpine from the F&M. Or, well, they said first he should leave, and if he doesn't leave, they should expel him. Whole editorial. First is, I'm not sure how they got to be their business. And you know, when F&Ms are fighting amongst themselves, yeah, just let them fight. I sit on the sidelines and watch it. But I thought, when I was talking to the leader this morning, I was saying, very interesting, just a historical perspective. When Andre Rollins and Greg Moss were attacking the leader of the PLP and the PLP, the Nassau Guardian said, great. They were heroes of freedom of speech. They should keep it up. They're talking truth to power and so on and so forth. Now suddenly, they must kick McAlpine out because he's attacking the FNM. I say this because there are these examples all the time of these double standards. One rule applies to the PLP, another rule applies to the FNM. You know, people who can't come back and run for office because they were corrupt, but you know, the deputy prime minister is sitting there having given a contract to himself, and it's great that he's back there. You know, as the late nurse Naomi Christie used to say, got nature's passport, so you do whatever you want to do. So that's our country. So those are the things I just wanted to tell you that we're trying to do, and I'm glad people have come out tonight. And forgive us for all this nitty-gritty stuff, but it is, you know, dreadfully important to get the basics and the fundamentals down, because, as I said, if the leader of the party or the leaders of the party determine, for example, that we need 1,000 people on Bay Street, where are we going to find them? Don't have a list, don't have the telephone numbers, don't have anything to mobilize people. So that's what we're trying to get. We're trying to get to know who is PLP and who we can call on for what.
Now.
And I say to people who are coming to us and asking us to do various things, we had a good talk with some businessmen in Freeport. I said, we are not asking you to take any risks. That's what political parties are there for. You come, tell us the information, we take it to the country. What we're asking you to do is to not sandbag us, because you know it's always convenient. We go, put ourselves out front, and then you know the next thing you hear is the very same people who came talk to you talking about these PLPs need to go sit down and so on and so forth. So that's all we ask. PLP is an organization that got almost 40,000 votes the last election, and that's building. And I think that all of the things I've said here tonight, I hope, gives you the confidence that there's some forward thinking and planning as to where we go from here, and that you will buy into that. Without the buy-in from you, none of this will be possible. So thank you very much, and PLP.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.